Today the committee is again looking at evidence from the British Council. The British Council has an important role to play in the UK's soft power influence, but as a public body, this committee also wants to see that it is spending public money well. So we've asked you to come back and see us. Can I ask our witnesses to introduce themselves today for the record? Can I start with you, Scott?
Yes, I'm Scott MacDonald, the Chief Executive of the British Council.
And I am Kate Ewart-Biggs. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive.
Thank you very much. And I think that you came to see us last in January. And since then, there's been a spending review and the next budget is round the corner. So I really wanted to ask you a general question, Mr. MacDonald, to begin with. What changes have occurred since we saw you last?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a timely moment for us to come back to the committee because I saw you in January. I think this government has now been in power for almost 16 months. In November, time flies. But we've had 16 months of negotiation on our financial discussions with the FCDO. We've made close to no progress, and everything has now stalled. And there's an urgent need to have resolution on our COVID-era loan, which continues to pose a significant threat to our financial stability.
How much is just so for people who perhaps didn't hear the last session, how much is the loan?
It's £197 million.
Yeah. And how much interest do you pay?
We pay, it's a floating interest rate, so somewhere between 12 and 15%, 12 and 15 million a year, depending on the interest rate.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
So that's one thing we need to resolve. We also need to resolve our grant and aid. There has been a spending review. The Foreign Office now has their allocation. They've yet to allocate that within the FCDO. And we have some urgent questions around that if we're to maintain our global network. And there are a number of other open issues, including our ability to use cash from assets that we sell. Since I last saw you, we sold our school in Madrid, something that we've had since the 1940s, for nearly £50 million, and that money is sitting in the bank. We're unable to access it to actually proceed with our restructuring, which I assume we'll come back to later. So there's some really urgent things to address.
Okay. Alex.
Thank you, Scott. So when we looked at your last corporate plan, it showed a forecasted loss of £22 million, but previously the forecast was a profit of £5 million. You've outlined some of the challenges that you faced at the start there, but could you go into a bit more detail on why the forecast has changed so dramatically?
Yeah, so if I go back all the way to COVID, we had a very tough time during COVID because our face-to-face teaching and exams businesses essentially disappeared, and we took a decision at the time to do some significant restructuring at the British Council so we could be affordable. We looked out and tried to decide what the forecast would be. We cut our headcount at the time by 17%. We cut expenses by about £180 million, or precisely £180 million. And we thought that would be enough. Since then, several things have happened. We have three main income streams: teaching, exams, and development contracts. And all three have continued to come under pressure since COVID, even more so than at the time. And if I'll just give you an example, our main competitor and partner in the IELTS business, which is the big English exams business, is IDP, a commercial Australian firm. And over that time, their stock price has fallen from roughly $40 to $6, just showing how tough those markets are from a competitive and technology basis. We've also suffered because of our ability to win development contracts. The UK spends less on development now, as you're well aware. That US aid is gone. Most of the countries around the world are following, so there is less development contracts to win out there. We've also suffered enormously from inflation being higher than expected. So if you think inflation was running at about 5% rather than closer to 2% expectation during that period, that's an extra £30 million a year. And we've had pretty extraordinary FX losses because of the strength of sterling. And that's again been about £25 million a year. So all those things have happened, and what we're doing is though facing into that and saying, okay, well, we got it wrong. We didn't get the forecast right. We need to make more cuts. And that's what we're doing. So we have a second restructuring plan, which we're rolling out right now, which has savings and growth in it of £420 million. It has further headcount reductions of 26%. So that means, that combined with the first plan means we'll have shrunk the British Council by 43% of our headcount. It has country closures of 35 countries on top of the 10 we closed after COVID. So that'll be 40% of the British Council country network around the world that we will close unless we get more grant. It has asset sales of 90 million, which is close to everything we own, with the exception of the art collection, which I'm sure we'll come back to later and discuss. But it's all the buildings, it was our school, and other things, and it has a major investment in online digital and
Do you mind if I do just raise the business of the art collection, because I've got this thing about it.
Yes.
But so has anyone spoken to you about the possibility of? Your art collection is worth how much?
About 200 million.
Yeah, so about the size of your debt, right? So it is something that I've suggested to you and to the Foreign Office too, is why isn't the ownership of that art collection simply transferred into, let's say, your debtors, the Foreign Office's hands, and to pay off that debt? Has anyone discussed that with you at all?
Very little. And let me give a really clear answer on the art collection, because I know it came up last time. So there's about 9,000 pieces there. It is worth about 200 million. Yeah. About 50% of it is legally restricted, so it was given to us on the basis that we would never transfer or sell it. But that means 50% isn't. But
it could remain in public hands if it was owned by the Foreign Office.
Yes, I'll come back to that because it's a good point. And given our financial situation, we've explored everything. Should we sell the whole thing? Should we transfer the whole thing? There's been very significant concern raised by our trustees, our partners in the arts and culture sector, the artists who gave us the art, yes, around having this art go into private hands, which I understand. And because of that, what we're practically doing right now is what every museum in the world does, and sort of conducting a review along the best practice lines, and selling art that we're not using enough or that no longer aligns with the collection. So we think that can generate 10 or 15 million over the next few years, but that's a small amount given what we need. What I have proposed multiple times, and Chair, it's exactly what you describe, is an exchange of that art collection, which should go into government hands. And then I think it would be in public ownership for the use of UK public in whatever way we decided to use it. There's possibly some synergies in curation and storage with the Arts Council and the government art collection as well. And in return, they could remove the loan from us, which would address our financial problems. But ultimately, the government would be whole overall. They would then own more art and not have a loan outstanding. I think it's a good solution for everyone, but we haven't gotten traction on it.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Sorry, do you mind going back to?
Yeah, of course. Those are quite catastrophic figures that you're saying there, 35 office closures, 43% of staff cut. That's an enormous change to the British Council's footprint. Has there been any recognition of that by the FCDO, that the situation that you're facing at the moment? And in the last meeting, you talked about the material uncertainty around the British Council continuing. Is that still the case? And what reassurance have you had from the FCDO, if at all, that we don't come into a situation that completely collapses the council?
So, yes, we still are, I would say, in real financial peril. Mm-hmm. And since I last saw you, things have only become clarified. So at the end of our financial year last year, in March, we had negative reserves of 114 million. We have this loan of 197 million coming due in September next year. Unless that loan is addressed in one way or another, we can't repay it in September. So technically, we're nearly insolvent. And it means that each year we have a huge battle getting our annual report and accounts published, because we have to prove we're a going concern. So the issue is still very, very live and substantial. We've had ongoing discussions with the FCDO, but no resolution on any of these points. We don't have a resolution on the grant and aid, which is what it would enable us to keep some of the network open and not make all the country closures. We don't have resolution on the loan, which is what will ensure our solvency and financial stability over time.
Thank you. I think Afra had some questions on the loan.
Yes, thank you. I mean, you've obviously said you can't repay the loan in September. I wonder if you could just set out what the current expectation is with the FCDO in terms of when and what the repayments should be, and if you were to begin making those loan repayments in September, what the impact would be for the British Council.
We spent the 6 months between January and August putting together a new restructuring plan. Because there are tough things in the market. We need to address those on our own. We don't expect the government to help us with everything. And that has all the elements in it that I described earlier around the people cuts or the country cuts. As part of that plan, we have said, if we actually have to start repaying the loan in a substantial part or even in a minor part, those cuts will all have to be far worse. So that would be cuts beyond the 43% of the people or beyond the 40% of the network. So we've made the case that doesn't make sense for the UK, or else you have a complete withdrawal of your main soft power tool around the world. If you want it to withdraw from more than 40 countries, or you want us to get rid of more than nearly half our people, that's what the implication of repaying the loan would be. So we've pushed very hard and said there are other solutions on the loan, and we've put forward 3. Ranging from sort of severity to or severe to less severe. So the loan could be written off with the right political will as an investment in UK soft power. And the British Council has subsidized UK soft power through our external earnings for the last 20 years. 83% of the income we have comes from outside the government. We raise that ourselves through teaching, through exams, through development contacts, through philanthropy, and we use that. We don't have shareholders or anything, so we use that solely for delivering on UK soft power.
And so one of your arguments, I think, which I don't think you've put before us, but let's just for the sake of clarity, do you mind? Just when you say they should write off the loan, you draw a parallel, don't you, with COVID-era government loans that were written off for other cultural institutions. Is that right? The COVID Recovery Fund.
Yeah, the Cultural Recovery Fund had about 1.5 billion in support. Over 80% of that was in grants versus loans. That was for public organizations plus for-profit organizations. And at the time, we were treated quite differently. We were given a loan on commercial terms. That $14 million a year we pay in interest. What we could do with that around the world is phenomenal. But let me come back, try and answer your question. So you could write off the loan. I think it's possible with the political will. You could swap the loan for the art collection, which the chair raised earlier, which I think is possible with the right political will. If neither of those are possible, you could turn it into some type of contingent loan where there's structures you could say, you only pay back the loan if it's affordable to you. So if you've built up reserves to a certain level, or if you have profit at a certain level, you start paying back the loan then. And so we've put forward all 3 of those ideas. I think there is some discussion going on about them in the FCDO and Treasury, but I'm not cited on where they are right now.
When would you need to have an agreement on this by?
So there's various deadlines. I mean, we're supposed to publish our accounts by the deadlines in December and January. If we don't have an agreement by then, we can't publish accounts on a going concern basis, so we need some resolution. And then certainly by September next year, when the loan comes due, we need an agreement on what will happen. But we can't run it right up until then, because we have partners around the world who rely on us being financially stable. We bid for contracts that rely on us being financially stable. And without being able to say to the world we're actually a viable organization, it's very hard for us to operate.
Bill.
Just sticking on the topic of your finances, despite having a hedging strategy, and you spoke or alluded to this earlier, on foreign exchange you had losses of, I think it was £6.2 million in 2022-23, and in 23-24 it was more than twice that, £13.3 million as I understand it. Did I hear correctly that the foreign exchange loss for 24-25 was £25 million? And if so, what lessons have you learned, given that continues to be an upward trajectory, and what assurances can we have that this time next year it won't be significantly greater than that?
It's a good question. So FX impact on a large organization like us is multifaceted. There's things that hit the balance sheet and things that hit the profit and loss statement. So I won't try and go through the whole complexity, but overall, roughly the numbers you're talking about are right, and they have grown significantly over time. And there's been two main drivers of those. This has been an extraordinary period of strength of the pound compared to the rest of the world. This is very hard to manage. The currencies we operate in, whether they're in Pakistan or Bangladesh or Nepal or Sri Lanka or so on, are almost unhedgeable, or the cost of those is impossible to hedge. So that's just, it's been a bad period for us that I hope over time wouldn't continue. But the second thing that is as significant is many of the countries we operate in on behalf of the UK, and I'll take the example of Pakistan. You know, we do an enormous amount of UK school exams in Pakistan. Mm-hmm. So whether that's for Cambridge or Oxford or others, that's a very large piece of what we do there, and that earns a profit from doing those exams. But Pakistan has currency controls because it has financial challenges, and you can't get the money out. Mm-hmm. And so we end up doing work there, money gets locked in there, and then when those currencies devalue, it hurts FX even more. So that's one of the drivers of it. Unlike our colleagues in the embassies, we have to comply with all the local status, tax, currency laws. You know, if you operate a diplomatic entity, you're outside all of that.
And for 24-25, was that a £25 million foreign exchange loss?
Yes, I think both 23-24 and 24-25, the best estimate of the number you should look at is 20, somewhere between 20 and 25.
You've announced that you are going to have to consider very significant further headcount reductions and closure of offices. Can you say something about the criteria under which you determine where the British Council might withdraw from? How do you decide which offices?
Yeah, so the criteria that drives our geographic prioritization is the same one that drives where we might withdraw from, which is essentially input from across the UK government, primarily through the FCDO, but also including DCMS, DBT, MOD, in terms of where their foreign priorities are, where are they trying to grow trade the most, where they have the biggest security issues. So there's a prioritization that comes from there. It's a prioritization that comes from the sectors we serve, so the arts and culture and education sector, where are the most important places for them. There's a prioritization that comes from the four nations across the UK, what's important to Scotland, what's important to Wales, for instance. And then there's a judgment on our part on where we're being effective, where have we actually engaged with government and people, and where were we having impact on the ground. And we put that all together and come up with a list of places that, I'd say the least worst places we can close. Every country we close is going to do damage to the UK, but we try and pick ones that will have the least damage.
But there is a conflict in that, obviously, one of your priorities is to raise money to fund your activities through English language examinations and teaching. But equally, there is the agenda of the Foreign Office, which is about the projection of UK influence, particularly into areas where there is perhaps contest. So to what extent is the Foreign Office saying to you, this is an area which we think it's really important that Britain should be visible and projecting values, even though it may not be your highest earning country?
So you're absolutely right, and we need to prioritize both those things, but they're not in conflict, except in very special cases, because the Foreign Office is basically telling us we want you to have the operations that you focus on around arts and culture exchange, education exchange, other sort of diplomatic work you do. They can tell us where they want that or don't want. Where we have things for English teaching or exams or to raise money in other ways, that's really our choice. And we need to, we try and make those aligned because there's enormous benefit if we have both in a country. That gives us scale and brand. But sometimes we have a country that is just earning money for the British Council. And we have many countries around the world that don't earn any money for us. They're just delivering for their
Can I ask you about specifically the Baltic nations, where there is an enormous effort taking place from Russia, particularly in terms of propaganda, but you have chosen already to say that you will close 2 of the 3 offices in Estonia and in Lithuania. Lithuania, for instance, 3% of the population are now Ukrainian refugees. That is an area where there is a very strong need for the projection of British values because of the amount of Russian disinformation that is taking place. So has the Foreign Office agreed to that closure, or is that something you have taken into account?
It's a good question. Kate is a bit of an expert on our Baltic region. I'm just going to ask her to answer that in some detail.
So yes, we are in discussions with the FCDO on the Baltic states because, as you say, the work that we've been doing, actually funded by the Foreign Office in their International Security Fund across all the Baltic states, has been addressing exactly the issues that you raise. That contract is coming to an end in March 26, and we would like to continue being able to do that work using all the networks that we've built right across ministries, schools, young people, etc. So we are in active discussion with the FCDO, and we are asking for a £20 million uplift in the CSR, which, as Scott says, is not yet settled, in order to be able to keep open the grant-funded work in countries, as you suggest, that are most important to the UK.
Thank you. Sorry, Monica.
Just to come in on the back of that, is it the cuts to the ISF that has meant that you've had to cut back on the work in the Baltic countries specifically?
So it's a combination of what Scott has described, that actually at the moment we can't afford to be in the number of countries that we are with the current grant and without the resolution of the loan. In the Baltic states, the majority of the activity was funded by the ISF project. So when that comes to an end, then actually being able to stay open in those countries is extremely difficult. We think there is a large demand for that kind of work, which is why we're putting in this request for an uplift in our grant and aid.
Can I also ask, you talked about the second restructuring. How many countries after that second restructuring would the British Council remain open in, and that is without the debt?
Yeah, so approximately 65. So we have 100 countries now. I think the actual number is 97, but we would be cutting 35, so we'd be down to 65 countries. But that relies on a solution to the debt. If the answer from the FCDO in the end is you need to start paying back the debt in September, we're going to have to cut significantly more than that.
And the number of countries you were open in before COVID was how many?
110. So we cut 10 in the restructuring we did immediately after COVID.
So it would almost half your presence overseas.
Yeah, it's over 40% down.
And can I ask a final question? In your conversations with the FCDO, you've obviously put these the mitigation of the loan and what to do with the loan. Why do you think that there is an obstacle to sorting that out? What is it that the Foreign Office is not getting about the work of the British Council?
I mean, I think the Foreign Office values the work of the British Council. They have their own financial issues to deal with because ODA going down so significantly, and they have to work with the Treasury very closely on what will happen with this loan, because the loan ultimately sits with the Treasury. What precisely is stopping us come to a resolution, I don't know.
Thank you. Just to build on the questions from Monica, the loan terms may not be favourable to you, but surely the government giving the payment holiday demonstrates their willingness and their want for the British Council to continue. Do you agree that giving you a 5-year kind of holiday shows the government's willingness, previous and current government's willingness, to see the British Council still succeed?
Well, I think that the giving us the loan in the first place is something we are very grateful for. We're in enormous trouble during COVID, and the loan helped us to survive. And not enforcing immediate repayment of that, or as you say, a holiday, we're also grateful for, and I think shows support for the British Council. But I think, when we've talked about our actual state of our finances, the challenges we have, that's not enough. And for us to be sitting here with a commercial loan using £14 million of our relatively limited funds to pay the loan interest instead of doing British Council stuff around the world, I think is not wise for the government. And for them to demand repayment in any short term is not wise, because we'll have to close way more countries and lay off more people. So I think there are many things they could do now to show more support and more understanding of the position we're in. But I agree with you. I mean, the support we've had so far, we're appreciative of.
We've heard today about your extensive art collection. We also, there are a number of buildings that you own as well. All of this, there is money in the bank for you to be able to repay at least part of that loan and move on. I'm surprised that in those 5 years from the loan to this point that perhaps different payment options haven't been considered.
When the loan was first given to us, it was £250 million. We sold perhaps the best business in our portfolio, which was our exams business in India, which took us out of one of our core markets to pay back the part of the loan we repaid already. So we did repay £53 million. We are now, as I said in my introduction, selling everything the British Council has that we are able to sell. So we are selling, I talked about estates last time, but we have 42 properties around the world. We're selling every single one that's possible to sell or attempting to sell them. We're selling that bit of the art collection we are able to sell under the terms of the museum code. We sold the school we had in Madrid. We don't have anything else. And we're going to need all of that money to actually do this restructuring that I described. I mean, to lay off 26% of your people and close 35 countries is enormously expensive for us, and we're getting no restructuring support from the FCDO to do that. A normal government, a Whitehall department that does a restructuring is given enormous restructuring support. We're getting none. We're having to fund that ourselves. I think what I've described is a more radical restructuring than any Whitehall department. It's getting no restructuring support at the current time from the government. And what we're really looking for is acknowledgement of all of that and a decision on whether, does the UK value the British Council and what we do? And the cases we've laid out around how we contribute to growth, how we contribute to security, how we contribute to the rebuilding with Europe, how we contribute to development, all of these things. If it's worth it, the UK needs to fund it. If it's not worth it, then we can get to work sort of shrinking further.
We've seen some of your work up close. For the record, I've got your headquarters in my constituency in Stratford. But this committee, some of this committee, we've seen the work on our recent visit to Romania, and we've seen the work that you do on gender-based violence with you supporting Ukrainian refugees and so on. It's a shame that maybe you're not making the case as powerfully as you could in Britain to explain not just to the FCDO but to politicians and the British public how much work you're doing globally, and perhaps that's something you could take away. My last question to you is, your original remit, which was drafted in a different time, said that in times of danger, this friendly knowledge and understanding becomes vital to the successful prosecution of war. Does this still apply, or has the British Council moved on?
I think it absolutely still applies. I mean, our view is that we make contributions around conflict. We make contributions sort of pre-conflict, during, and post-conflict. So if I use the Ukraine war as an example, I mean, we've been in Ukraine doing work for over 30 years. And it's an example of why pulling out would be so dangerous, because if you go back pre-2014 in the invasion of Crimea, no one would have thought Ukraine was an incredibly important country in the portfolio. It would have been one that you close because it's sort of a peripheral thing. It's become incredibly important. We were able to take our historic operation there, push in way more resources to do things. When the full-scale invasion happened, the first thing we did is put together a UK Ukraine celebration of culture that ran for a year to give the Ukrainians something to hold on to and morale building. And then we've done all sorts of incredibly practical things since then around teacher training, university best practice sharing, cultural heritage training. So we have a massive role. And it actually brings me on to a point, if you'll indulge me just for a minute. We have an enormous role in security in general that I think is underappreciated. And in April this year, there was a letter to the Prime Minister from 37 former ministers of defense, foreign secretaries, generals, admirals, head of the intelligence service, head of the special forces, that said, it said, as we compete for global influence, the need for the British Council's unique contribution to our security is greater than ever. We call upon you to invest in this great national asset and force multiplier before it's too late. So I think the role is still there.
Thank you.
Phil, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, it was just on the loan, and you mentioned, Scott, about restructuring supports. One of the questions I've asked previously, and I'm still not entirely sure about, is how does your engagement with the Foreign Office compare to your peers, for instance, Institut Français or Goethe Institute, their conversations with their respective Ministry of Foreign Affairs around what extraordinary sort of revenue support or loan arrangements were provided during the pandemic for your peer competitors? So it'd be useful if you could enlighten us to any extent you can about how your treatment and your relationship with the Foreign Office compares to those other country organisations.
So the British Council is the world's preeminent soft power organization. I think we pack more punch around the world for the UK than any of those organizations do. And we receive a fraction of the support that they do because we manage to generate so much income outside of the core government grant. So we have roughly £1 billion in income, and roughly 840 of that comes from things that we generate, whether that's through development contracts, teaching, exams, philanthropy, partnerships with corporates. All this money we bring in to support UK soft power. So it makes us a very, very effective tool. But if you get down to the actual support, so we get £163 million from the Foreign Office. And just to put that in perspective, we got 190 in 2006. If you took into account inflation over that period, that would be 330 now. We got 163. So we've actually gone down from, by more than half if you include inflation. But compare that 163 to what they invest in the similar organizations in France. It's 600 million. In Germany, it's 900 million. In Spain, it's 900 million. And in Portugal, it's 250 million. So the UK has gotten, it's been a great partnership because we raise all this money to do the things the British Council does, and we put it all together and we have £1 billion powerhouse. It only costs the government 163. I think one of the reasons we're so frustrated is we've provided all this funding for 20 years, and now when we run into some difficulty, that there's a complete unwillingness on the part of the government to help us.
Can I just take you back to, Monica, do you want to, we were thinking about the way in which for example, the World Service, there's some discussion about using defence funding to assist with the World Service, given the almost a redefinition of how we defend ourselves. And particularly given the answer you gave to Umar, I wondered whether there had been any thinking about replacing some of the ODA funding that you had received in the past with some defence funding instead. Have there been any discussions about that?
It's a really good question, and it's been a constant open question for us. One of the challenges we have is the FCDO is our sponsoring department, and they provide our entire grant. And the governance is strange, because once the FCDO gets their grant, whatever they give the British Council comes out of what they have. Yes. It's an odd arrangement. So if you're running the FCDO, you obviously try and minimize what you give to the British Council. Now, we provide significant work and services for DCMS, DBT, certainly, the MOD. We have all sorts of interactions. And I think this is probably one of our structural problems, which we have never been able to solve, because the FCDO in the end makes the decision, and they're conflicted when they're making that decision.
Yeah, no, very interesting. Thank you. Monica. Oh,
Just
sorry, Monica.
coming
Yeah.
on the back of that, and I was taken on that by the work that you talked about that you did for the Integrated Security Fund, which has been cut, and therefore you're not able to do your work. But you talked about the structural problems of your financing. So is it the case that the British Council has almost been a victim of its own success in that your commercial activities have been so strong over a decade and the grant and aid therefore has been squeezed further down? And if you then put it in relation to, for example, you mentioned France, where it's £600 million a year and you're at £160 million, so the grant and aid is that much smaller. Is it a historic structural problem done by FCDO predecessors, for example, that has got you into this situation?
Well, I think we've jointly created this problem, but for the benefit of the UK. So we have all liked what's happened with the British Council because we're able to, assuming, and I think this is the case, that most people value highly what we do. And certainly that's what we hear from the sectors we work for, largely from across the FCDO network, whether it's ambassadors or geographic leads. Everyone values what we do. And we have managed to do that at incredibly low cost to the taxpayer because we've made all this other money from other places and put it all into a pot. And that hasn't been forced on us by the government. We've helped do that and raise it. We've been happy about that, and we like the idea. You minimize the taxpayer's input and maximize the output for the UK. But we've reached a point now, it's 83%, so when there's some wobbles on the income side there, it puts us into financial difficulty to be able to deliver what we've delivered. And this is when we're trying to go back and say, we've had a really good deal in the UK now. For a long time, the British Council's provided all this funding, but now we need some help and we need some support.
Sam.
Thank you. So take you back to the answer that you gave in relation to soft power and how other European countries are funded a lot more than the UK. How do you see soft power being impacted given the trajectory of the funding going down? Is it likely to impact on us further?
Yeah, I often talk about the British Council being a main soft power delivery mechanism for the UK. We're not the only one. There are many parts of soft power, whether they come from the legal profession, the regulatory profession, sports, all these other areas. But we're the organization that's on the ground everywhere and probably the front line of this soft power. And to the extent, our funding is cut or we pull out of countries, we're not able to engage with the people in those countries. We're not able to do all the things we do. We're not able to support our other colleagues across the soft power sort of spectrum. So I think it has an enormous impact. And this is in a time when the world is more contested now than it's been in a very long time. Other people continue to invest in soft power, enormously so. And in order to maintain sort of UK presence, UK influence, our ability to impact around the world, to get sort of win hearts and minds around the world, we need to be there, and it's a relatively cheap investment. I often say, if you look at the entire cost of the British Council, this is only a handful of missiles, and we need both, but ours is a great hedge.
Mm-hmm. One of the indices has noted that for the first time, the UK has fallen from second to third, overtaken by China for the first time. How impactful do you think that is, and is there any means of us climbing back up the ladder?
Well, I think the reason it's fallen is that China invests enormously in soft power. So, they're a similar institution to the British Council. They invest more in that than we do. I suspect no one knows exactly what China invests, but it's probably 100 times what the UK does. And it's having an enormous impact in regions like Africa or Latin America and many other spots around the world. And I think we do need to compete and show what's great about the UK and how can we impact the world positively, what do we have to add, how can we maintain relationships, share our values across those places. But that doesn't come for free. And I don't think it's that expensive in the scheme of things, but we need to invest in it.
If we're showing a decline, and you're saying potentially with 35 further countries that we will no longer have an office in,
realistically the trajectory is that we would potentially go down in those indices going forward?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's because we've had no support, there are 35 country closures in our restructuring plan. Personally, I think that's a disaster for the UK. Those 35 countries that we will pull out of, that will have an enormous impact on our profile and the view of the UK in those countries, and will certainly impact those indices.
Thank you.
And Claire.
Thank you. You've talked a lot about areas and where you've had to cut, but those areas which you, in your 2024 strategy, set out targets for growth, for example, number of English tests, opening coding hubs, partnering with civil society groups, and I've seen that for myself in the West Bank. I saw some work being done with Palestinian groups on culture and homes there as well. And also you've talked about investment in online services. So where are your areas for growth? Were you able to deliver on them despite all of the changes you've had to make in the restructuring in the last year?
Yeah, so let me group them into two buckets. So sort of impact areas for growth around the work we do in arts and culture exchange or educational exchange, we've made tons of progress in. So we're reaching more people out there in the world with good messages and doing more work. And maybe a few examples. I mean, education now, one of the big shifts in higher education is from student mobility, so a shift from students coming from the rest of the world here to UK universities doing partnerships around the world to set up local campuses or similar models around the world. It is a real shift. And so this is an area where we introduce hundreds of UK universities to hundreds of universities around the world to do deals, and those are economically good for our universities. I think they're good for the world for a multitude of reasons, and we've managed to grow all of those areas. In teaching and exams, where we generate a lot of income, we are growing all of our sort of online and digital businesses, but in the context of a brutally competitive market that I described before. So the sum of that is actually, we've shrunk in the last year, but I think over the next few years we'll continue to pick up speed and we will be successful there.
Do you partner with the Open University? Because I did my Open University exams in the British Council buildings in Nairobi, so I know there's some maybe commercial just for the office space, but you said you're going to grow online. We have the Open University, which is excellent at providing those services. Are there those kind of partnerships that you have, and are they an area for growth?
Yeah, so there are many partnerships like that. I don't know the answer specifically on the Open University, but we've got lots of partnerships like that, and I think they are an area of growth. I mean, almost everything is growing at the British Council in terms of demand and opportunities for us to partner. And where we've been able to do that without additional financial investment, we have been successful. Kate, do you know the answer on the Open University?
I don't know the answer on the OU, but we have lots and lots of partnerships all over the world.
I think that earlier when you were talking about restructuring, you began to talk about the work that you needed to do online and the use of AI. I cut you short, and I think it's probably important for the record for you to have an opportunity to explain that when you talk about restructuring that you will be doing more online. Is there anything further that you'd want to say on that? Yeah,
so when I talked about the restructuring plan, I said there were 420 million in sort of surplus improvements, profit improvements in there. 260 million of that comes from cost-cutting, efficiency, rationalization. But 160 of it comes from investment in new products. And those are essentially online teaching products, online exams products, and AI-enabled products. And we've done an enormous amount of investment into all of those areas. And I'm confident we will manage to grow there. We have a phenomenal brand around the world in the English language. And so we need to put in the phenomenal products behind that to make people want to use them, which we are doing.
Thank you. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. MacDonald, you mentioned earlier that the British Council is present in Ukraine, and on the 27th of August this year, of course, Russia launched 629 missiles at Kyiv, one of which caused severe damage to the British Council offices in Kyiv. Could you say how your work in Ukraine has been affected by this?
Yeah, we have So I said we've been in Ukraine about 30 years. We now have about 55 people in Ukraine, and our office took 2 hits. I don't think either direct, but enough to totally destroy it. I went the week after to see the office. And like many things in Ukraine, it's an amazing story of resilience, because I arrived to see my 55 staff and they'd just been blown out of their office and had nowhere to work. And what they said to me is, we don't want this to stop us at all. So we're going to continue doing our programs, we're going to figure out where we do our teaching, we're going to continue to do our education work, our teaching in times of trauma work, our teacher training work, our work with universities, and all those programs continued. It's quite heroic, because they don't even have, they don't have photocopiers or anything to work with, and so we're desperately trying to get them into other space and keep them going. So, we will continue there. We're very dedicated, and it's an example of how well we work with the government overall, because we work very closely with the FCDO there, but we work very closely with all the other departments, and what the British Council does to support Ukraine fits in with all of that. We recently launched with the Prime Minister a schools twinning program. So there are now, I think the number's 50, but it's going up to 100 UK schools paired with Ukrainian schools. So the kids will have a chance to talk to each other, share stories, get to know each other over time, and build the bonds.
Staying with the attack itself, in the wake of the attack, the Russian ambassador was summoned here in London and met with FCDO officials. From the perspective of the British Council, was this the correct response? Was it a sufficient response from the UK?
I think we had, in situations like this, unlike the financial stuff I talked about previously, we have enormous support from the FCDO. So on the ground support is very good, and then diplomatic pressure and support is very good. I don't know precisely what was said in those meetings, but I understand the messages were very tough in those meetings.
And from the point of view of your people on the ground in Ukraine, given that Russia's aggression is partly about extinguishing Ukrainian culture and seeking to prevent Ukraine from assimilating Western culture, do they feel that they were targeted deliberately by Russia?
I think technically we just don't know. And I'm sure there are a variety of views across the group, but practically they did bomb our building. It could have killed people. It didn't in the end. It injured one person who was there overnight because the bombs came in, I think at 5 a.m. or so. And so they're thankful, and they're angry. They've been angry for a long time. I think what we try and do, and one of the things Kate is responsible for, is just make sure we're focused on the safety of all these people. So we have incredible protocols around how we manage crises like this and the safety of the people. I think they're comfortable with that, and they just want to get on with doing the things they can to protect the country.
I think it's given them further commitments to doing the work on behalf of Ukraine's culture and education system. So actually what we find is a group of even more motivated people. And obviously it's very important as we go forward that we're thinking about their safety and security as well alongside that.
I'm quite sure that I speak on behalf of the whole committee by wishing them all the best and our great admiration for their bravery and their commitment.
Just quickly on this point. You were, of course, quite recently labelled as essentially an arm of British intelligence services by Russia. And I know you don't operate in Russia now, but have you detected any further kind of pressure on British Council offices in areas where Russia is quite strong?
This has been a long-running claim by our Russian counterparts that we have some link with the intelligence services. I mean, I've been at the British Council for 4 years and seen zero evidence of that, and I've been all around the world. I've seen what we do. I don't believe it at all. Your question is a good one, though. Other Russian-influenced countries around the world, are they raising concerns around the British Council? We don't see evidence of that yet. We're very alert to it and very sensitive to it, just to watch out for things and try and make sure that we're making the case in these countries. Because I think it's better for the British Council to be operating in countries than just withdraw. And over time, we've withdrawn from very, very few countries in our history, Iran and Russia being the most recent ones for these types of reasons. But we'd like to stay in places and actually keep lines of communication open. So we do work in places like Myanmar, Venezuela, Cuba, and other countries around the world which are very contested. And I think that it's a really important role because the UK government struggles to operate in these places where we're there keeping lines of communication open.
Which is why we'd like to continue doing more of the work in the Russian neighbourhood in disinformation, and hence the ask back to the Foreign Office to support that work going forward.
Thank you, Chair. We have a UK Soft Power Council now, which you sit on, Mr MacDonald. I just wondered if you could give us an update on its work and what it has been achieving in recent months.
Yes, so the UK Soft Power Council was the brainchild of the former Foreign Secretary, who we were delighted when he came into his role, just how excited he was about soft power and the importance of it, and he formed this council. The council is roughly 25 people from across all areas that might influence soft power. So it includes the British Council, also includes the BBC, includes, again, sports people, culture people, people from the legal profession, people focused on democracy, all these areas. We think it's a really interesting idea because you mobilize the UK across all these areas to work together to try and amplify the work each of us do, to try and layer on, do things at the same time rather than set apart. It's still pretty young. We've only met 4 times, but there's a plan for future events and future activities, and we'll first of all have to see whether the new Foreign Secretary has the same desire to keep the Soft Power Council going. We'll know that soon enough. And then we'll really have to start measuring the impact of what it does over time. I think it's too early to say whether it's worked or not.
Because I think you said it needed more funding back in January. Is it received that funding?
The Soft Power Council, I think, is making a bid within the spending review. We haven't been aware of that, but at the moment they have a team that is the Soft Power Hub team that runs it. And it will need investment in the same way as the British Council BBC World Service does, yes. And I'm not aware of where those discussions have got to.
Is there much activity between meetings?
Yes, there's a lot of activity between meetings, all sorts of subgroups working away, and the British Council is involved in most of that. Because again, those are people from all across the soft power spectrum. The British Council, I think, is still the main delivery tool, so we're involved in most of those discussions, and we actually have people in the sort of secretariat of the council as well.
Yes, Monica. Oh, it's Abby Hamilton. Was there anything further you wanted to ask? No, it's fine. So it's Monica, yeah.
You've said that a funding uplift would allow you to reverse closures in Europe and the USA and expand into Francophone and Lusophone Africa. Why these places specifically?
So I think we've in fact moved on a little bit from that, because now that we have so many closures, what we've done is we've said out of the 35 potential closures that are in our restructuring plan, we've said we recognize how much pressure the FCDO is under in the spending review, but for £20 million, we could keep 20 of those 35 open. And we need to work with them on the prioritization of exactly which 20 they are and why. We have our view, and we need to work through that line by line with the FCDO on it. But we're certain that most of those countries need to be kept open for UK interests.
And so therefore, instead of expansion, you're looking at keeping the offices that you have. And so therefore there is no room for expansion under current budget?
Yeah, any ideas we've had on expansion are on the shelf for the moment. So we are just trying to maintain as much of the current network as we can. Now, one of the things about the British Council is over time it should constantly evolve as the world evolves. Some places become less and more important, and so we try and keep, even in places that don't feel important at the moment, we try and keep a minor presence there, because it's really expensive to come out and then try and go back in. So you can keep 1 or 2 people there doing really interesting and valuable things, even though it's a limited resource. And then if that country becomes incredibly important over time, like my Ukraine example, you can suddenly flood it with resources.
So in terms of looking for the next opportunity for British soft power, for example, presumably that's on hold.
Well, I think our network now encompasses most of the places we want to be. It's a question of resource. So if you think about, maybe I'll just use a couple of examples, Kate, and you might have some more. North Africa, where there might be a real shift from French to English. You know, we could play a huge role in that and help in those countries if we had more resource. And I think there's examples like that all around the world of things we could turn the dial up on to help with either trade or security or some of the other priorities of the government.
Just returning to the soft power question, the soft power council question. So this has been set up at a time that the British Council is losing funding. That seems to me to be kind of contradictory. What's your take on that?
So I think that if we run them well, they can be complementary, because the Soft Power Council pulls in all these other places as well. And if the British Council still has a big role in basically delivering all that and helping shape it, I think it's great to pull in all those other views and capabilities from across the UK. There probably is a bit of a conflict in funding in this environment, and they need to resolve that.
John, Joe.
Can I just ask you a little bit more about the restructuring plan? I mean, you have suggested that unless the Foreign Office provides extra resources, 35 offices may have to close. As far as I'm aware, you've only identified 5 at the moment as being potentially going to close. Croatia, Slovenia, Austria, Estonia, Lithuania. Has there been any communication to the offices that you have identified as possibly up for closure, and what impact is this having on your operation if this is hanging over the organisation and you're not able to provide any details?
Let me talk about morale first, and then the country list itself. So I think morale at the British Council at the moment is at best mixed. I'd say the good side of it is we continue to do great work around the world, have enormous impact, and that's why our people are here. They're inspired by that. Most of them love the British Council. That keeps them going. At the same time, they have incredible uncertainty. They don't know which countries we'll be in or not in. They don't know the size of our grant. They don't know what we'll be able to do. It's very hard for them to plan. And so the place is very fractious at the moment, and we have a lot of incredibly unhappy and stressed out people. Now, part of that does come from the issue around countries. Now, I would be happy to share with the committee privately the list of countries we're looking at, but I don't want to get into the names today because we haven't shared all of those names with our people around the world, our partners around the world, the governments we work with around the world, because it's kind of a list in negotiation, and we're constantly working on it. We're working on it with the FCDO, and so it will evolve. But the specific answer to your question, I mean, we've tried to, in some ways it's been unproductive, we've tried to give a heads up to our people to the extent we can that your country is at risk. And we don't have an answer yet because we don't know the grant funding and we don't know exactly where we'll end up, but we don't want you caught completely by surprise. But it is incredibly unsatisfactory because you can imagine they're saying to us, I just need to know, is the country going to be open or not? Do I have a job or not?
And when do you expect to be in the position to tell them?
Well, I would like to be as soon as possible. I mean, the FCDO has their grant settlement. They have had a really tough job to do because of the significant ODA cuts. So they've been having to work through the intra-FCDO settlement. I think that should come any time, between now and Christmas, I would hope.
I mean, I think it would be only fair to say that you did say the same thing to us, I think, in January, that there would be these office closures and that you would share them with us privately, but we've not heard anything more. I'm just so that
I can rectify that.
That's all right. Just for the sake of the record. Dan.
Thank you, Chair. I know you work very closely with our diplomats and you'll be working with our embassies, and with cuts to ODA, with job losses that we'll see in the Foreign Office itself and the pressures that you're under. I just wonder if you could paint a bit of a broader picture about where you see the UK presence in many emerging economies and important countries over the years ahead?
I mean, when we worked a lot with the previous Foreign Secretary, and I think we were very close to coming up with a solution on the loan and on the grant, and there was real political will to get to something, because the view at the time was this is not the time for the UK to withdraw from the world. This is there is enormous competition and there's enormous challenges around the world and all sorts of terrible behavior. And now is the time for the UK to step in with all of the great skills we have, the best practices we have, and have influence on the world. I think that view is of course shared by all my colleagues, all my diplomatic colleagues. And so anything we close out there is enormously resisted by the diplomats on the ground. And I think it will be damaging.
We've only got a few more minutes left, but if anyone has any other pressing questions, Monica, you think you have one?
I have one just on the back of Dan's question. Following on from what you said, has there been a loss of influence or reputation of the UK, for the UK, as a result of British Council closure so far, or would there be, were there more?
Yeah, so I mentioned that we had closed 10 countries after our first restructuring after COVID, and there'll obviously be a loss of influence in those 10 countries, but we tried to minimize that through the period. I think the bigger loss in influence is coming just by how stretched we are everywhere. So all the things we get asked to do across the UK government or even by the FCDO, there's only a limited portion of them we can do. I think if we close another 35 countries, there will be enormous loss of influence for us. And it's just not, in the scheme of the foreign policy perspective of the UK, it's not a sensible decision to not spend that 20 million and keep a number of those offices open. Especially given, the trajectory of our grant over time. And that grant has gone down because we've been so successful raising other income. But it wasn't, it's not meant that soft power is any less important or the British Council is any less important. We were just able to fund it a different way.
Good. Is there anything that we haven't asked you that you would have wanted to put in evidence in front of us? We have a couple of minutes if there's anything further you want to say.
Maybe just one or 2 points. When looking at us, I think some of this is a hard-nosed decision for the UK too. Like, is the British Council of value compared to other things that we could spend money on? And we've constantly tried to emphasize our value to the two big priorities of the day, which are growth and security. And on the growth side, we discussed this at length when I was here in January, but since then we hired an external consultant to look at the British Council with a really hard-nosed view. And we said, give us the most pessimistic view of the annual value we create for the British Council. And they came up with a number of 1.1 billion that we contribute every year through the work we do assessing English, promoting the UK as a study destination, training thousands of agents and counsellors in English, the work we do linking up cultural institutions here with partners around the world, and the work we do linking up education institutions with partners around the world. So we're already paying for ourselves 6 times over, and I think it's a substantial underestimation, but I just want to make the value point. And then on the security point, I mean, the work we're doing in Ukraine we've talked about. Kate touched on the work we do on disinformation in the Baltics and the Balkans. This stuff is incredibly important and valued. The work we do in the Middle East and across the Levant and Yemen and North Africa, and I mentioned some of the hard-to-touch countries before. So I think there is a really strong case too. I'm not expecting people to put their hearts on their hands on their hearts and say, oh, we love the historical British Council. It's what we're actually doing, what we're actually delivering that I think is important and needs to be reflected in the financial settlement.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that we will see you again in a few months. And hopefully things will be easier for you by that stage. Let's have our fingers crossed. Thank you.
Thank you.
all very much.